Hello, ready for the last two chapters of the entire term. This is going to be for chapters 37 and 38 and wrap this sucker up. Boring background, I know, done in the classroom. So, per usual, let's get past those main things. Community structure and dynamics. Okay, so we have already covered all the stuff about the population. The population is the single species in the area. The community are all of the parts acting together in that area. So that is why we went from the population to community. Community ecology is concerned with the stuff that's affecting the various types of species and the interconnectedness and whatnot. So interspecific interactions. Inter means individuals of other species. Intra would all be the same species. So interspecific interactions is the relationship with the individuals of other species and the community and how it affects the population structure and dynamics. So we get to talk about what I think's really cool, and this is going to be I was going to call it just symbiosis. I think that does count. So symbiosis. So you can see from this little table here, competition has a negative effect on both of the species. Mutualism has a benefit to both species. The rest of them, one species benefits, one species does not. It's harmed. So that would be predation, herbivory, parasites, and pathogens. We're going to cover each of these. So interspecific competition. Like I just said, mutualism, both populations will benefit. Predation, one species, the predator, kills and eats another one, which is the prey. Kind of like in the population one when we talked about the boom and blast, where we talked about the snowshoe hare and the lynx. So the lynx would be the predator, the snowshoe hare would be the prey. Fun fact, though, this also counts for like a caterpillar and a leaf. And I find that kind of cool. All right, herbivory. Animal consumes plants or algae. And parasitism. The host plants or animals are victimized by parasites or pathogens. So we're going to talk about each of these. We have an ecological niche, which is everything has this one perfect spot in the environment where it's like the golden place. That is where they thrive the absolute best. Interspecific competition will occur when the niches of two populations overlap. Both populations need that resource that's in short supply. So then this causes the competition, and one will always win out over the other. You just don't know which one it's going to be because whoever gets more of what is needed is the one that will be able to reproduce and kind of take over. Mutualism benefits both partners. Mutualistically beneficial. So here they give an example of reef building coral and the photosynthetic dinoflagellates, that how they both work together. The photosynthetic dinoflagellates have a nice shelter area where they have plenty of light, plenty of access to light to do their thing, and then they provide a whole bunch of sugar and everything that then helps feed the coral. The coral's waste products ends up building up the rest. And so this is where the two of them work beautifully. My personal favorite has to do with ants. And I can never remember the name of the plant. They have these huge thorns, and the ants will live inside the thorns. And so the thorns protect the ants, but then the ants bring food to the plant. And so that's kind of cool. It also works with, if you remember, we talked early on about mycorrhizae, where the fungus grows on the roots of the plant. So that's another good example. Video, not going to play it, but this is commensalism, where one benefits and the other one, it's like, yeah, whatever. So the clownfish has extra layer of mucus on it. I've talked about it before in class where I talked about Finding Nemo and the scene of Marlin and Dory going through with the jellies and how she got stung easily, but marlin went on longer, and it's because of the extra layer of mucus. But anyway, the clownfish can live in the sea anemone and not get stung because of that special barrier. It does absolutely nothing for the sea anemone. Sea anemone is not changed one iota about whether or not the clownfish is there, but the clownfish can live there and hide, and so it takes a benefit. Predation benefits the predator but kills the prey. No kidding. Oh yeah, this brings us to the cool stuff. Now, because of this, there's a lot of prey species that then have evolved various ways to chase them away, whether it's camouflage to hide or an actual defense. So here we go. This is one of my favorite ones to do in class because I like it on the big screen and to see who notices. Here, this is a perfect example of camouflage where the tree frog hides right there in the bark. So a basic predator is not going to notice him right off the bat. I think that's kind of cool. The monarch butterfly actually has a poisonous something in it due to what it eats. So any of these animals that, like if you've ever heard of poison dart frog, they get the poison from the food that they eat. So their body processes it, holds on to the chemical to be a chemical defense. So if something munches on it, they get sick and or die. And it teaches the others, don't eat these. Now, what's really cool is the coloring of the monarch butterfly. You have other butterflies and moths that actually mimic the coloring. They are not actually poisonous, but since other animals have learned to avoid the monarch, they actually use that as a deterrent, which is kind of cool. So, plant whose body parts have been eaten by an animal must expend energy to replace the loss. And so this is why some plants will actually grow defenses against herbivores. Some of them are obvious, like spines and thorns. Think of a cactus. You're not going to really want to munch on a cactus. And then others have chemical toxins. And some of these we use medicinally or for other purposes. Some of them not so much. Like seriously, if anyone who's ever had a reaction to poison ivy, poison oak, or poison sumac, that is a plant's defense right there. Like the chemical defenses of animals, toxins in plants tend to be distasteful, and herbivores learn to avoid them. Some of them even produce chemicals that cause abnormal development in insects that eat them, and so that basically kills off those insects. Some herbivore plant interactions illustrate something called coevolution, which means the two of them adapted together. I used to have this this little comic that I added in there, and I lost it ages ago, that showed how complex the coevolution can get. And there is a type of orchid that evolved so specifically, and the one insect that evolved in order to pollinate it, that when man started to use too many pesticides and whatnot, wiped out this insect. And without this insect, it was impossible for this orchid to reproduce. And so that is a great but sad example of coevolution. Now here, I think is kind of interesting. Here, you've got the caterpillar that's munching on the plant. If you look at the one picture, that's the actual eggs that the caterpillars hatch out of. The butterfly who laid the eggs saw the plant, knew it's a good food source for her babies, and so plops the eggs there. Well, they're not going to lay eggs where there's already eggs, and so some plants have actually adapted to have fake eggs. They're not actually balled up or anything, and they just look like it from a distance. And so the butterfly is going to think that leaf is already taken and will go on to a different plant. So that's pretty cool. Parasite lives on or in a host where it obtains its nourishment. I think we've all heard of parasites. We've got the internal ones like the nematodes and tapeworms, and we talked about tapeworms early this term. And external parasites like mosquitoes, ticks, and aphids. And if you're wondering about the whoosh, I've got my fan blowing there because, you know, you can never trust what's happening in this classroom. Anyway, plants are attacked by parasites, and these plants, these parasites that are tapping into the plant are getting the phloem, which is, if you remember, xylem up, phloem down. Phloem down is their sugary stuff, and the plant sap. Pathogens and disease-causing microscopic parasites include bacteria, viruses, fungi, or protists, and we've talked a ton about these things. Non-native pathogens have rapid and dramatic impacts. So like if you have something come in that hasn't been seen before, it'll wipe everything out. In history, you should have learned about when, I can't think of the proper phrasing. Basically, when non-natives came to the US and took over. I can't say discovered because they sure as heck did not discover this country since people were already living here. But when they came in, they brought smallpox. And since the natives who were living here had never been exposed to it, it wiped them out. Same thing for ages back. There was the American chestnut blight, where it came in and just wiped out all these chestnut trees. So there you go. Every community has a trophic structure. This is basically how they eat. So if you remember, we covered autotroph, which means self-feeding. So they make their own food. And then we have heterotroph, which is us, where we have to obtain our food from an outside source. So sequence of the food transfer up the trophic level is known as the food chain. Most of us grew up with the food chain, but it turns out there's more of a food web. I used to make you do a crazy lab on this, but it gets very convoluted, so I'm just going to kind of like over it. All right. So first and foremost, we've got our producers. The producers are the ones who produce food. So our autotrophs, plants are producers, and like algae, bacteria, that kind of stuff. But to make it simple, I'm just going to say plants. So we've got our autotrophs that are known as producers because they are producing the food. Then we have herbivores that are primary consumers. Herbivore means they only eat plant material, so they are a primary consumer. They are the first level of consumption of heterotrophs. Secondary consumers typically eat the herbivores. So say you eat a cow, a burger. At that moment, you are a secondary consumer because the cow was primary consumer. Then you have tertiary consumers, which typically eat secondary consumers. So since a pig is not strictly an herbivore and they eat anything, if the pig had eaten some chicken scraps, that would have made the pig a secondary consumer. And then if you ate the pig, like you put bacon on the burger, that would make you a tertiary consumer. Quaternary is for four. These typically eat tertiary consumers. Now, they can eat anybody else down the road, but you're not counted quaternary unless you have eaten a tertiary. So a good example of this would be basically like if you ate, please don't eat the shark. I love my sharks. But if you ate a shark who ate a tuna, who ate a bass, who ate a sardine, then that would be how you go up there. Yeah, they're sea bass. Okay. I was about to think that I was thinking I messed up and that they were not all saltwater fish. But yeah, there's such a thing as a sea bass. So there we go. Oh, I can never say this word. Detrivores. They get their energy from detritus. It's the dead material. And so they literally are just eating the stuff that's already dead. And then we have decomposers. These are mostly the prokaryotes and fungi. And what they do is they secrete an enzyme that dissolves it and then they kind of slurp it up like a straw. And this is the part of decomposition. If we don't actually have the decomposers, we're in trouble. We desperately need them. And that's one of those fun facts I also cover in environmental science is around Chernobyl. They tend to be missing all of the decomposers. The whole melting it and slurping it up is why if you have food in your refrigerator that you kind of forgot about, it got shoved into the back, and then you find it and it's fuzzy, it's now kind of liquidy because it's doing its job. It's dissolving so it can suck it up. And we'll go ahead and do the checkpoint question. If I'm eating a cheese pizza, at what trophic level am I feeding? That's a tempting one because this would be, you're not eating just plant material because you presumably have egg in the dough and you have dairy on the cheese. Those come from animals, but they're not animals. And so this would be are you at this point still just a primary consumer, or are you a secondary consumer because you are consuming animal product? Good question, right? This is an example where they have the producer is the phytoplankton, the zooplankton eats them, the herring eats the zooplankton, the tuna eats the herring, and the killer whale eats the tuna. That works. And then, of course, we have the other one for the land animals. But literally how this works. So if instead of killer whale, you put you and you ate the tuna fish at that moment, that would make you a quaternary consumer. Now, again, it's not so simple as that straight line for the food web or the food chain. It's actually a food web because it all is interconnected. So here we go. We've got our producers, our plants. We've got our primary consumers that are eating the plants. Then we've got our secondary consumers who are going to eat the primary consumers. And then we have our tertiary consumers and our quaternary consumers. And if you notice, it all goes around because they don't just stick with that. And then as the things die and they rot into the ground, then we've got the other parts that are taking it and mixing it all up into the rest of the nitrogen cycle. So it all continues. So it really is all connected. Species diversity. This is defined by two components: species richness, which is the number of different species, and relative abundance. This is how much of it is available in the species community. So where it says proportional representation, it's like how many of them are there versus the other. You're going to have more insects than anything else because that's just the way it is. Low species diversity, characteristic of most modern agricultural systems or ecosystems, because we've kind of eased them out. Keystone species. I do like getting to talk about the keystone species. First, you have to think back to agriculture, or not agriculture, architecture. If you have ever taken walks around the neighborhood and you see like the arches and you see that one big stone at the top that's bigger than the rest, that is the keystone. That's the one that everything is balanced on. If you remove the one keystone, everything falls. That's the same thing of why it's called a keystone species, is because that species dictates everything that happens below it. So this is what I was talking about for the keystone. When you remove the one keystone, the rest crumbles. Same thing happens, like I said, for the keystone species. Bears are normally listed as one of the main keystone species, but there are others as well. Disturbances, events that damage the biological communities and include storms, fires, floods, droughts, and human activity. Trust me, human activity is the biggest one. And again, cover a lot of this in environmental science. Small scale disturbances often have positive effects. However, it is going to change things around. And if these small scale disturbances happen too often, then it can actually cause large scale disturbances. Now, we have succession, ecological succession, transition in species, composition of a community. We have primary and secondary. Primary is gradual colonization of barren rock. Secondary occurs after a disturbance that's destroyed a community but left the soil intact. So the textbook in most things normally refer to primary succession as like after a volcano has erupted and the lava has flowed. The lava hardens, there's no soil, everything has to slowly grow up from there, and then that's considered primary succession. We live in the city. We don't have volcanoes. And I like to give people labs to go out and find examples for this. And you still can. But instead of looking for a place for lava for your primary succession, go to a parking lot, somewhere where they have destroyed everything and lay down concrete or tar or something, and give it some time, and you will see little plants forcing their way through because nature wants to be here. And I think that's pretty cool. So when you see something cracking through the pavement, that's primary succession. Secondary succession is like where they have chopped everything down and there's nothing but dirt, and then stuff starts to build. So, told you, lava, primary succession. Secondary succession, Yellowstone, after a fire, the fire destroyed everything, but the dirt was still there, and then everything grew back. Invasive species. It's so funny. I really do feel like I'm trying to quickly do environmental science in here. And I'm looking at how many slides there are, and it's a lot, and I want to finish this. So, invasive species. These are organisms that have been introduced into areas where they are not supposed to be. They are not there naturally. So humans bring them, whether on purpose or mistake, it happens. And then they kind of take over. And I mentioned the ecological niche a while ago. That's pretty much what happens here. The invasive species goes, ooh, I like this spot. I'm going to live here. And it takes over. And then the native species disappears. And yes, environmental science, I cover a bunch of them. Ecosystem consists of all the organisms in a community and the abiotic environment where the organisms interact. So if we follow my organism as you as your student, your population is the Bio 124 class, and the community is GMC Rockdale, our ecosystem would be Rockdale. Okay. In an ecosystem, energy flow moves through the components of an ecosystem, and the chemical cycling is the transfer of materials within the ecosystem. So this is just showing you how all of it works together. It's basically putting everything we have covered from Bio 123 and 124 together. Everything works harmoniously. Primary production, conversion of solar energy to chemical energy by photosynthesis. This is pretty much why our plants, our autotrophs, are our primary producers. They are producers. They are going to produce the organic material to fuel their own cellular respiration. And while doing this, they're providing stuff for everything else to use. So, remainder or the net primary production is the amount of new organic material added in any given period. This is just showing you various types of ecosystems and how much extra they tend to build or offer throughout the lifetime. I think you already know that the tropical rainforest is supposed to be one of the biggest ones. It gives a whole lot out, but look how important the coral reefs are. Coral reefs are super important, and they are a very small amount, and it's part of why we're supposed to protect our oceans a little bit more. Pyramid of production shows the flow of energy from producers to primary consumers and to higher trophic levels. Only about 10% of the energy stored at each trophic level is available to the next level. This is huge, very huge. So if you just look at these, the plant, the producer, 10,000 kcal. The primary consumer gets about 1,000 of that. The secondary consumer gets about 100, and then the tertiary gets about 10. So every level you go up, you're losing energy. Trying to remember what all slides I have in here. I like to use this as an example of why when you eat a more vegetable heavy meal, and I don't mean if it's doused in butter, that's a totally different thing, but like if you think of a big family event where everybody's eating, if you eat more of the salad and the corn and the potatoes, you have so much energy. You eat a whole bunch of the chicken or a couple of burgers, hot dogs, you feel more weighed down. You have to sit there and rest a little bit to give your body the chance to digest it because it's taking more effort. That's kind of how this boils down. You literally are obtaining more energy from the plant material than you are from the animal material. I was wishing I had a particular slide here, but I might. Well, I'm going to say it, and then if I have the slide, then I'll say, hey, I already covered it. The amount of material required to raise one cow to slaughter would feed multiple families more than that one cow will actually feed. And so we actually are in an energy deficit every time we raise cattle for consumption. It's crazy. So omnivores, humans are omnivores, plant material and meat. When humans eat grain or fruit, again, we're primary consumers. If you're eating beef or other things that are herbivores, secondary consumers. And then if you're eating fish like trout or salmon, you're a tertiary or quaternary consumer. So this is what I've already covered. A field of corn can support many more human vegetarians than meat eaters. So that's what it falls under right there. So anytime somebody talks about people starving and we need better ways, the best way to help defeat starvation is actually quit raising animals for meat. Here's the picture I was seeing in my head. So here you go. If you have a bunch of vegetarians, you can feed a whole bunch of them. If you're using all this corn to raise cattle, you're not feeding as many people. It's just the way it breaks down. It's the way it is. Am I telling you, you need to stop eating meat? That's on you. I just like to make sure that you make educated decisions. Yeah, I'm not going to go any more into this because I can very easily get sidetracked and I want to finish. So chemicals are cycled between organic matter and abiotic reservoirs. So ecosystem supplied with a constant amount of energy coming from the sun and also coming from inside. So except for meteorites, there are no extraterrestrial sources of chemical elements. All of the elements are from what's already here. It just keeps getting recycled. We have the biogeochemical cycles, which include the biotic components and the abiotic components. The biogeochemical cycles can be local or global. Not going to worry about that. Carbon. We have talked about carbon before, and trust me, if you take environmental science, we will talk plenty about carbon again. This is the main ingredient for organic molecules. If it is considered organic, it has a carbon backbone. We covered that in chapter 2 in Bio 1, 2, 3. It has an atmospheric reservoir, which means it kind of hangs here. Cycles globally, and it resides in plants and animal biomass, fossil fuels, soil, sedimentary rock, and has dissolved carbon. When you burn something, you are releasing the carbon into the air. When something dies and starts to rot, carbon is one of the things going back into the cycle. And that's what this is showing you. It's just showing you how it all cycles around. We then also have other things like phosphorus. And then we also will have nitrogen. We covered this a lot when we talked about the plants. I'm not going to worry too much about it. But again, it's just another nitrogen cycle. We've talked about this before where it's eutrophication when there's over fertilizing, whether it's fertilizer itself or cow poop or whatever, and it comes down. It then causes huge algal blooms in the water, which then chokes out anything living in the water. So this is the growth of the cyanobacteria in Lake Erie because of the nutrient pollution. Oh, how does this connect us all together? Well, we rely on everything. We can't live here without nature. Even though man tries so hard to discount nature, we desperately need it. So our natural ecosystems give us our fresh water and some of our food. It recycles our nutrients, decomposes our waste products, and regulates climate and air quality. Oh, good God, that last one. That is one we will cover so much in environmental science, and I'm sure I will talk some about it in the next chapter too. Wetlands, these guys are great. I've referred to them before in a previous chapter as, like working like the carbon sink. It helps filter a bunch of the stuff. Natural vegetation helps to retain the fertile soil, prevent landslides and mudslides. We've got sustainability coming here too. We have a bad habit of deciding we want what we want and not worry about the rest. You can look through so many of our areas to see how Mother Nature gives us the smackdown when we keep thinking we know better. Before California had nonstop fires, if you remember, mudslides were the big thing because people decided they wanted to build these huge, incredible homes up on these cliffs. And in order to do so, they removed a lot of the plant material to have a pretty view. By removing the plant material, they took away what was holding everything in place. Then it rained and then mudslides, and we would see these giant buildings just sliding off the side. So that's what all this comes around to. And then the dust storms. We've talked about this previously already. So that is that chapter, which brings us to chapter 38, and we're almost done. Conservation biology. There is a huge difference between conservation and restorative. Conservation biology means we conserve everything where it is now. Restorative biology means we're trying to restore it to what it once was. So this is conservation biology. First part is the loss of biodiversity. Bio means life, diversity is the difference. And so biodiversity literally is all the different kinds of life. So we have 3 levels here. We've got the ecosystem diversity, which would be like if we're talking the biomes, we're talking the desert, the ocean, deciduous forests, that kind of thing. Species diversity, so the different types of species. So humans, cats, dogs, mice, deer, whatever. And then genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is just as important as all the rest because if we don't have enough diversity in our genes, we're going to die out. I think we go more into each of these, so I'm going to hold some of what I was going to say till we get there. 2015, I would like an updated one of these. Assessment of species. The yellow is extinct or extinct in the wild. Then we have threatened, near threatened, and lowest risk of species. Keep getting emails and it's making noises. But anyway, the one thing I want to point out here is the extinct or extinct in the wild. Extinct in the wild means that we technically still have some of the species in like zoos and locations like that. But at such a low number, we can't keep them because you can't take just a male and a female and then fill up an entire species. That, again, is not enough genetic diversity. And I'm not sure if I have a picture about it, but I'm going to cover it now. Constant inbreeding causes issues. We have seen this with, well, most cultures have rules against interbreeding with your own family for this very reason. We see this with the artificial selection when people are trying to make the perfect breed of a dog. And all of these purebreds have very specific genetic issues. So it's like, I want to say the Pekingese, the eye can pop out. Pomeranian, the leg pops out. Shar Pei gets that weird fungal growth. Dalmatians tend to go deaf. I mean, it's across the board. Anywhere where we have narrowed the gene pool too much, there are issues. The one that I tend to like to use the most, and then I tell everybody you should look it up, is the white tiger. White tiger is very rare, but business-wise, they discovered you can have people come running here to see a white tiger because they're so rare. So they kept interbreeding to get more white tigers, and now we actually have white tigers with Down syndrome because of how much interbreeding we've done. So there you go. This is showing you the ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and genetic diversity. Already covered all of these. Human alteration of habitats, single greatest threat to biodiversity. We suck. Humanity is not exactly eco-friendly, and I wish we would do better. Invasive species disrupt communities. We already talked about this one. Harvesting at rates that exceed a population's ability to rebound is a threat to many species. Oh goodness, do we do this? And again, yes, environmental science, I cover this. I can like see the slides in my head about the over harvesting. Here is one example where they just clear cut all that timber. They took all that destroys everything. So that does not just remove all the trees from this area, that removes everything that was living in and around those trees in that area. So you, just by doing this, they destroyed an entire ecosystem area. They destroyed so many habitats. And yeah. We have a tendency to put pollutants pretty much everywhere, and we are infecting things far, far away. There is something called biological magnification, and this is where it's going to concentrate the toxins that can't be broken down. So mercury is the big one here. Yeah, I'm still going to talk about mercury, but this is from the Deepwater Horizon, and this poor pelican is doused in crude oil. He can't fly. During any of these oil spills, there have been plenty of cases also of like sea otters freezing because the oil held down their fur, which is literally made to be water buoyant in order to keep warm. But the oil squished it down, and oil spills are just, it's not just annoying because it's going to raise the price of your gas. It's literally killing everything around it in very not good ways. The mercury that we keep pumping into the air falls down eventually into the ocean, and then the little things are eating it. And I think I covered this in Bio 123. I see the slide in my head when I talked about bioaccumulation and showed that the bigger the fish, the more mercury it had. And this is the reason now, if you look at a can of tuna fish, there is a warning for pregnant women, and it warns you that it might not be safe for a pregnant woman to eat because of the level of mercury. And so the rule of thumb is the larger the fish, the less often per week you should consume it. And then this brings us our PCBs. We talked a little bit about this in a previous class when I talked about Rachel Carson and DDT. So we talked some about this, where what happens is it gets consumed and then it gets magnified as it goes up, all the way up until you get to the bird that's eating the fish, and then their babies suffer. And does this happen to humans too? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Totally. Start Googling about our forever chemicals and the microplastics. And that's being linked to so many neurological issues. So what was that? Oh, okay. Global temperatures increasing because we have been very bad humans and not cared. And the way our country is currently going, it's going to get even worse because at the moment, almost everything that the US had been trying to do to help fight climate change and to make a healthier nation has been removed. So, as we are being pushed to use less renewable resources and more non-renewable resources, we are just going to keep kicking more of these greenhouse gases into the air, which means we are just going to keep getting worse for a while. So, this shows you, I wish we had it all the way up to 2025, but it shows you up to like around 215 or 2015. You can see, yes, there were some hot years in the past, but nowhere where it's been. And if you've been paying attention, each past summer has been the hottest summer in history. So we have done this for a couple of years in a row, and we keep beating the previous year. And That's disturbing. Much of the increase in greenhouse gases results from burning of fossil fuels, which the US seems to want to do more of. As I've said before, anytime you're burning something and there's carbon in there, it's releasing the carbon into the air. A lot of people say, yeah, but the plants are absorbing the carbon dioxide. Yeah, some of them, but they can only take in so much, and we keep removing them and burning them too. So this is kind of like you being at Cece's Pizza or at a pizza buffet where they keep making more pizza and they keep making it and they're piling it on top of you. And at first, you might be like, oh, yeah, this is a good deal until you start getting buried in pizza. Same kind of thing. They can only take in so much. And yeah. So carbon dioxide might also be absorbed into the ocean where it dissolves in the water. And if our coral reefs are doing great and the various types of seagrass, seaweed, and whatnot are able to absorb and process it and release oxygen, we're doing okay. But the problem is we're also killing our coral reefs. The climate change has now, I can't think of the proper word there, raised? I think raised would be the right word. The temperature of the ocean. And last year, the ocean on the coast of Florida, where we do have a nice big coral reef, was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It can't survive like that. And so then if we don't have anything processing it, it then raises the acidity of the ocean, which then will start killing off everything else in the ocean. Okay, distribution of terrestrial biomes primarily determined by temperature and rainfall changing as a consequence of global warming. So what's happening here is as things get hotter here, the stuff that was living here that needed to be cooler moves up here. This is the reason why, and I talked about this, I think, just last week. We have a lot of the mosquito-borne illnesses that used to just be South America, and now it's in North America. It's why if you really like crab, the price is so much higher because our ocean is getting warmer, so they're moving farther away and it's getting harder to capture them. Then we have these types of things. This was a huge wildfire back in 2015. We've beaten this wildfire. Like, I don't know. It feels like there's a constant catastrophe competition happening right now in the US. And it's just going to keep getting worse because we have managed to drain California of most of their groundwater, and they keep getting drier and drier, which makes it easier and easier to catch fire. Meanwhile, on our East Coast, we keep getting wetter and wetter and having more and more floods. And it's all due to what we've been doing. Polar bear, we've got the shrinking ice caps and the shrinking areas. And so they have less area in order to live. But I'm also going to tell you the other terrifying thing, which I believe I also covered in Bio 123, which is where we have managed to pollute the planet to such a degree. The chemical involved in making children's pajamas flame retardant is found in the tissues of polar bears. And so, like, if a polar bear dies and they do a necropsy, which is an animal autopsy, and they test the tissue, they find that chemical in their tissue. So we have polluted our ocean enough that we have been able to put this into the material of an animal that doesn't live around humans, much less factories. Let that one sink in. Phenotypic plasticity. Minimize the impact of climate change on some species. Several cases of microevolutionary change have been observed. However, how rapid our environmental stuff keeps changing is making it unlikely evolutionary process will save many species from extinction. So little changes have been taking place with the bodies, the species trying to survive, but we are changing faster than the generations can adjust. And humanity is just screwed on this one because we have long life cycles. So pretty much insects will have a better time adjusting to what we're doing to the planet than we will. Conservation biology and restorative ecology. Conservation biology, I told you at the beginning of this, goal-oriented, trying to understand, counter the rapid loss of biodiversity. We're trying to conserve what we have. So some of these, they've worked with black-footed ferrets, whooping cranes, and the Hawaiian silver swords. I have not checked this date. Last time you can see I updated it was in 2020, that there were 350 black-footed ferrets left in the wild. Conservation biologists were trying to help bring them back. This particular plant was endangered, but now it's listed as vulnerable because the steps they were taking to protect it actually worked. Then we have conservation efforts trying to help sustain ecosystems and landscapes. Because if we can protect the ecosystem and the landscape, then we're also protecting the habitats for so many other species. So landscape ecology, application of the ecological principles of the study of the structure dynamics, blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty much the same thing as for protecting the ecosystems. Here is landscape with distinct edges in the Yellowstone National Park. Edges between ecosystems have distinct sets of features and species. So here you really need to be very careful because any adjustment here or disruption, I should say, which happens a lot with people, could make a huge loss. Because a lot of these areas have what's known as movement corridors. This is for like the migrating animals. This is where they go from here to here, and that is part of their life cycle. And if we muck it up, we can destroy them. So this is an example of trying their hardest to still let humans do their thing, but then animals still cross. This is one of the better attempts because at least the animals can still cross over, but I promise you animals are still going through the railing and getting squished by cars. They also attempted to do a thing where for salmon to go up, and that one failed miserably because they had these streams and they built something next to it so the salmon could still go upstream. But it's not like the salmon are going to go, oh, hey, look, this is set up for us. They're going to go up the flipping stream, you know? Anyway, biodiversity hotspot. This is a very small area with numerous endemic species. Endemic species means this is the only place that they are found. And there's a large number of endangered and threatened species like this. I mentioned the bamboo forest earlier when I was talking about pandas. Well, the bamboo forest is, there's only, I'm hearing sirens, sorry. Pandas only live in bamboo forests, and they only live in bamboo forests in China. That means that the bamboo forest in China is extremely important. Now, the hottest of the terrestrial biodiversity hotspots totals less than 1.5% of Earth's land, but it's home to a third of all species of plants and vertebrates. So that means this sucker has a lot. And this is going to be like your tropical rainforests. We have zoned reserves. These are extensive regions of land that include one or more areas undisturbed by humans, surrounded by buffer zone, and they take it serious. They're trying to protect this area. We have question mark a few, but at the moment they are being trying to think of a better word than what's in my head. They're being rezoned in order to use some of that land for more economic purpose instead of protecting the land. And it's disturbing. Then you have some countries like Costa Rica who are finding a way to protect their nature by encouraging something called ecotourism, where they protect their ecosystem in order to bring people to see their ecosystem. That way they can make money to keep things going, but also protect what's there. The idea here is like when you would go to a national park, you pay to go in, that money goes to help protect the national park. It's that kind of thing, but bigger. So Costa Rica takes it seriously. It's trying to protect a lot of its area. Part of why I really like Costa Rica. This is an example of where biologists were monitoring the travels of a gray wolf in the 1990s in order to find out that they required this particular passage. There have been many, many, many scientists and groups that have followed various animals in order to see what they actually required, because a lot of people seem to think you just need this space. But without understanding what the animal truly needs, we can't provide it. And so this was one where they discovered there needed to be safe space for the wolves to migrate in between two areas. So that brings us to where later, at one point, they decided that there were too many wolves. They were impeding on people's livestock, and so they killed most of them off. When they killed most of them off, they discovered there was a huge elk population. The huge elk population was munching too much of the vegetation. It was causing a lot of issues. It was bringing a rise of disease, and they realized they had removed pretty much the keystone species in that area. And so they had to then bring the wolves back in order to properly balance everything. Once they brought the wolves back in and it brought the elk population down, everything else started to flourish. So it was a big, important lesson that just because you're angry that this thing's eating your cows doesn't mean that they don't serve a purpose. Pretty wolf. Restoration ecology, I told you at the beginning of this, that this is where they're trying to bring it back to its natural state. So basically, clean it up and put it back how it was. If anybody remembers Fukushima, Japan, when that was like, oh my gosh, the Mac Daddy of disaster films, where we had the earthquake under the ocean, which caused the tsunami, which knocked out the nuclear power plant. They're trying to restore everything to what it was before. The big one is the one in Florida, where I talked about this in class at one point too, where they decided we want this to go this way. And they tried to make all the water go this one way so they could utilize all this land. And again, as nature does, she did the smackdown and was like, nope, you don't know better than me. And now they're trying to put the whole water system back to where it was. So you can see where the canal was, and now you can see where they're trying to bring the water back to how it used to be, because Mother Nature knows better than man, just so you know. Sustainable development, ultimate goal. Yes, I've already talked about this ad nauseum. If we want to keep living here, we need to still have stuff. Yes, we all agree on this. But we need to live harmoniously with the planet, because the planet's going to be here when we're gone. And that's one of the big things that humanity needs to learn is if we want humanity to survive, we need to quit thinking the earth is our own personal buffet. We need to take care of it. And so that's pretty much what all this is. There are ways to do sustainable development. We can still build, we can still increase, we can still improve technology. But the issue is we need to not limit the ability of our future generations while doing this. So we need to think it through. You need to take all of it into consideration when figuring out the price of something. The current state of the biosphere is grim, where it says it's far from hopeless. I'm having issues with this one right now. I used to think it was far from hopeless. The past 100+ days, I'm getting a little, I'm having issues. So right now, where it says now is the time to aggressively pursue more knowledge about life and work toward long-term sustainability, yes, 100% yes. That's what we need to be working on currently. And that's it. So this is the end of the entire textbook. It is the end of Bio 124. And hopefully you got enough info. And of course, feel free to message me with any questions you have. And I guess for the last time for these courses, peace out.